Welcome. Monday was the second day of Yom Tov Pesach, so I'm recording this at night. And if you're following along our journey through the Rambam, you're welcome to continue along with here as well. We are at Perek Dalet, chapter 4 in Hilchos Isurei Bia, the laws of forbidden relations. Perek Dalet, Hanida, someone who is a lady who is a Nida. Hari Kishar Kalarais has the same laws as many of the other forbidden relationships. Hama'araba be'gedarke ben shalei gedarke chayiv kares. Someone who has relations with her, whether it's in the normal way or the abnormal way, is chayiv kares, is obligated and then liable for karet. Karet is a punishment of cutting off from heaven, which we've discussed a number of times earlier. Even if she was a young girl of 3 years old and one day, Keshara is the same as all other forbidden relations. Because technically the Rambam writes a girl can become a nida from the day she's born. And from 10 days old she can become tamei with ziva. The difference between nida and ziva we will learn in further chapters. Nida is a regular period flow, and ziva is a different, out of the ordinary one. This we learn from the verse. There's no difference between an older lady and a young girl when it comes to the laws of impurity caused by nida or ziva. Number 2, nida. Someone who has relations with a nida for 7 days while her period has begun. And even if she only saw on the first day, and someone who has relations with someone who gave birth to a boy for 7 days, or if she gave birth to a girl for 14 days, there are different levels, as we'll learn in a later chapter, the different levels of tuma, impurity associated with birth of a boy versus birth of a girl. Zava. Or if you had relations with a Zava, that's the lady who's having a Ziva, during the entire days of her flow or the days of her counting. Whether she's a maid servant, whether she's set free, Akol, but Karas, all of them have the punishment of Karas. Shnemer, like it says, Benida Shivas Yamim Dehi Benidasa. It says by Nida 7 days she will be in her Nida. Uvizava, or the Ziva, it says, Kol Yimei Zev, to Masa Kemei Nidasatia. During all the days of her impurity, it will be like the days of her Nida. For Yeledis, Remi Kemei Nidasatitma. That should be tama like a nida v'tuma shivayim kinidasa, and it also says the verse she'll be tama for 2 weeks like a nida by the girl. Hence, they all use the terms of nida. Hence, we have the similarity in the impurity. Number 3, gimel b'met v'armal morim shatum atluya b'yamim. When are we talking about that the tuma is contingent, the impurity is contingent upon a certain amount of days? When she went into the mikvah after the proper amount of days. But if a nida or a zava or a lady who gave birth did not go to the mikvah, someone who has relations with her after she became tamei once, either as a nida or as a zava, or as giving birth, and then she never goes to the mikveh, she will remain tamei forever. And even years later, you'll be chayiv kares to be liable for this punishment if you have relations. Shebiyamim utfilat ala kostav. The verse says it's contingent upon both the amount of days as well as going to the mikveh. Shenamer, like it says for rachsu b'mayim, it says you have to wash in water referencing to the mikveh. And from there we learn for all other impurities until you go to the mikveh, you are tamei, you're still impure. Which just means that a lady who became a nida at one time should go to the mikveh to end at that time, if it seems to be years later. Because until that time that she goes to the mikveh, even once after it's concluded all of her periods, she will still be tamei. Once going to the mikveh once will remove that status of nida. Halacha Dalad 4. Hagoyim chayavan alei mishum nida. Non-Jews did not have the laws of a nida. V'lo mishum ziva, v'lo mishum yoled. This is not of a ziva and not of a childbirth impurity. Chachamim gazir al kol goyim. Tzchar munikevish yir kezavim tamin. And Chachamim decreed that non-Jews should be like zavim, like they have a ziva, male or female, whether they actually did see or did not see, about the laws of Tuma and Tara, of impurity and impurity. This is a decree of the sages to kind of create a little bit more of a difference in space, if you wish. Hey, all blood which a lady who gave birth will see during 33 days of after a boy is born, or 66 days after a girl is born. Here, it's called pure blood. That is blood that is, she's tahor, she's still pure. And this does not cause her to not be together with her husband, because normally when you're impure from a nida zavayoldas, you're not allowed to have relations with your husband. Like we've been saying, if you have relations, you're liable for karet, for the punishment of karet from heaven. But here, during these certain amount of days, the Torah said the blood is considered dam tohar, pure blood, and will not refrain a husband and wife from being together. But technically, as long as it's 7 days after a boy, the 14 days after a girl, and again, we'll learn more of the details in a later chapter. As long as those passed, then she goes to the mikvah, and she can be with her husband, and the blood that flows for the next amount of days up to 33 or 66 is irrelevant in these laws, and she still remains pure. Vav 6. Anyone who has to go to the mikveh here needs to go to the mikveh and do their immersion during the day, except for a nida and a lady giving birth. It says by a nida 7 days she should be in her nida status. Ashiva kulam benida, all 7. So if he goes to the mikveh during the day, technically she's going too early. She has to wait till the 7 days conclude. But Tevel is below Shmini, therefore she goes to the mikveh on the beginning of the 8th day, the night, as in Judaism, everything goes the night before the day. So then end of the 7 days, the next night is already the beginning of the 8th day. We call it Leil Shmini, the night of the 8th. That's when she goes to the mikveh. The Chin led the Zachar below Shmini, and same thing for them, one who gave birth to a boy. Again, we said yes, 7 days. Then she goes to the mikveh, will be that 8th night, beginning of the 8th day. She lets the giving birth to a girl who has 14 days. At the end of the 14th, the night of the 15th is when she would go to the mikveh. Zion 7. She waited many days and did not go to the mikveh, did not immerse. When she goes to the mikveh, she should still go by night, even though technically speaking, she can go during the day because she's already passed her she completely ended her 7 days or a 14-day cycle of that week that we were worried about, which is she's impure. Why does she have to go at night again? So the Rambam continues, she can teach by Yom. If she won't go to the mikveh during the day, people will make a mistake. But in other nidas will say, oh, she went during the day, I can go during the day. And what will happen? They will go on the 7th day when you're not allowed to go. So therefore we say always go at night. If she was ill, or if the place to go to the mikveh was very far, when a woman is not able to go there and return at night, at least because of the highway robbers at the time. Even that because it was too cold out at night. Even they Medina Balayla, or if they shut the gates of the city, the mikveh is perhaps outside the city in a lake or a river, etc. Maybe the mikveh building, and she would go out of the city, and then she would turn around to come home, and the gates would be closed. So Rambam says, "Is it developed begin Mashmini?" In those cases, go during the 8th day. So even though we told you not to go during the 8th day, technically speaking, and because of the concern of somebody else will make a mistake. In this situation, you don't have an option. If you don't have an option, go on the 8th day, not on the 7th day, but go on the 8th day. Or one of the later days, the 8th day, the 9th day, the 10th day, etc. Then you can go during the day. Incidentally, as they placed curfews in certain countries during this last pandemic, during the pandemic now, people had these questions that came up to rabbis, which wasn't just of ancient times, but modern times, because they're not allowed to be out in the streets at night. And various rabbanim in various communities had to deal with figuring out what was the right answer for their particular situation based on timing and etc. But generally speaking, every lady will go to the mikveh at night, and the only accepted exception, other than certain situations which you speak thereof, which may come up as regarding perhaps infertility, but other situations which are very out of the ordinary circumstances, would be a kala. A bride can go during the day, so she can go the morning of her wedding, etc. And there's a number of reasons why that was allowed, but it's also a very different setup than this type of a setup. In any event, that's just some outside notes. Test number 9. Any woman who has what's called a veset. A veset is a set cycle. She is considered tahar to her husband until she says, I'm no longer tahar, I'm now impure. Until everybody knows she became a nida. In those days, there were certain people who would wear different clothing for the nida time, perhaps because it was stained due to the flow of blood, and they don't want to always stain new garments. And if she's wearing something of that nature, everyone said, oh, clearly she's a nida. That's what we're talking about, perhaps. Halach, so she's always pure until either she says it or until we see a clear statement. Halach her husband left to go for a business trip, and when he left, she was told she was pure. In New Jersey, doesn't have to ask her; he assumes she's still pure. And even if while he walked into the room, she was sleeping. If it's not during the time which we're going to learn about soon of a veset, of a time that we're concerned, it was a regular day, he comes back, even when she's sleeping, technically he could have relations. In other words, he doesn't need to ask her. He doesn't have to be concerned that maybe she became a nida, unless there's some concern, which we'll talk about later. Even on the reverse, if he left, and she was a nida, he cannot assume she is tahar until she clearly says, I am pure. The lady said to her husband, I'm tummy, I'm impure. Then she said, no, I'm actually pure. And I just was laughing and making a joke. I said I'm impure, I'm a nida, but really I'm not. In a minute, she's not believed. But if she gave a reason for her word, then she is believed. Rambam continues, Ketzah, what does this mean? If her husband said, let's go be intimate and have relations, and nearby was her sister or her mother. So she tells him quietly, I'm a tameh. And then later on she comes back and says, actually I'm pure, I'm not tameh. And the only reason I said I was impure was because of my mother or sister who were nearby. Or perhaps they'll see or they'll hear or they'll pick up that we're having relations, and I was embarrassed. In a minute, she's believed. In other words, it's easier, quicker for her to tell her husband, I'm impure, than to start giving a whole conversation. And later on, she comes back and explains herself, that's fine. But if she doesn't have an explanation, we don't want them getting into the habit of just saying, I'm tummy and I'm not tummy, I'm tummy. It's a joke, it's not a joke. These are things you don't make jokes about. And therefore, if you made a statement, we're going to take it on face value. Yud Aleph. He was in the middle of having relations with someone with his wife who was pure. And suddenly she says to Macy, my period is because I'm impure, like you first they should not conclude their relations while they're still actively involved. Because the act of ending relations while they're still in the midst of it is pleasurable as well. And if he was still actively hard when they concluded, Chayav Karis Kimishabal Nida. He would be Chayav Karis. He would be liable for Karis, just like someone who had relations with Nida in a regular circumstance. And this is the same halacha and any other forbidden relations. What should they do? She kind of stick, the Rambam says, his feet to his toenails into the ground. And he should wait. And he shouldn't. He's kind of gripping himself with his feet that he's not doing any more motion, until it loses its hardness, until it loses the activity involved, and then he should remove himself. So the two of them should not remove themselves and conclude in the middle of the act because that's also benefit and therefore it's the same. But they should wait till afterwards. Yud Beis 12. A person is not allowed to have relations with his wife close to her vesed. What is a vesed? Vesed is a time set up that we're concerned that she might expect to see her period. Because then maybe this will happen and it will see blood in the middle of having relations. Because it says you should caution Bnei Yisrael, warn Bnei Yisrael from the impurity. So we have to take a step further. There's a caution, there's a warning, not just the actual moment, but something else. What is that? If she was during that time period when she was used to seeing it, if she saw it by day, don't have relations during the day. And if she was accustomed to having a period during the nighttime at that time period, so then we say do not have relations at night either. Yud Gimel 13 other vestal also with the if this time that we were expecting it passed, let's say it was a night, and we were concerned that that night makes sense on her calendar, she should expect her period to begin, and that night passes, the period doesn't begin, and she's allowed to be together with her husband and go back. Kate said, what does this mean? The Rambam continues, if it was her custom to see in the 6 hours of the day, she's not allowed to have relations from the beginning of the day. Also, 6 hours passed during the day, and she did not see. She still has to finish the day in a forbidden state until the evening. On another, the other side of the scenario, if she would normally have her period begin at 6 hours during the nighttime, in the middle of the night, then she remains forbidden. They are forbidden to have relations until the night ends, which means the sun comes up. Habit of the Rambam writes the routine of Bnei Yisrael, men and women, Jewish men and women, is always to check themselves after they have relations. Keta, what does this mean? The husband checks in a shmata and in a gauze or something that he prepared. The lady checks with a cloth or gauze that she prepared. And they see perhaps there was blood during this time of being together and being intimately together. And after the husband checks, he checks on the shmata, he's allowed to let his wife, the Rambam says, check the shmata to see if there's any signs of blood. Why? Since we trust her for her own checking examination, we trust her for his as well. Because and incidentally, there are a lot of variables on how this actually plays out nowadays, and when you need to do it, when you don't need to do it, when it might be the custom that has come down in halacha since the Rambam. But we're going to keep going with how the Rambam sets it up here. That's about 15. These shmatas, these garments, these scarves that they're using should be made out of linen, should be white. They should be kind of worn out. Worn out means you should be kind of softer to be used. They're called Adim. Adim, we've already learned, means a witness. But here, this is testifying to whether they saw blood or not, so we call it a witness. We borrow a name. And his garment, his shmata is called Eid Shaloi, his witness, and hers is called her witness. Tezayin, Hatzinois, Ena Mishamshis of Shiyizvek Asmot Chilukid Matasher. The Rambam says a modest people would not have relations till she checks herself before. The Isha She'en Lavesis, and a lady who does not have the time to expect or need it to begin, Asura L'Shamesh Ad Shetivda, she's forbidden to have relations until she checks. So therefore she needs to have two edim. One before relations, one after relations. Since she doesn't have a time we're going to expect it, we're concerned it could come at any point, so we tell her to check before and to check after. But a lady who does have a time that we do expect she doesn't really need to do beforehand because we know when we're expecting. We're expecting it on that day, at that time. Any other day or any other time, she technically doesn't have to check. The Rambam said because it's sneas, it's a measure of modesty. Some had the custom to check. But the Rambam says, according to his reading into the halacha, that after relations, everyone should have one him and one her. Even if she's pregnant or nursing, or she's postmenopause, or she's pre the beginning of her period, she's a katana, she's a young child, should still have relations with two, one for him and one for her. But if she was a virgin and she's sitting on during the time when her blood is pure, and she doesn't need edim, that blood that comes about right after the very first time that they get married and she was a virgin, that flow of hymenal blood is not considered impure blood. Nowadays, in most halachas don't necessarily apply like that, and before weddings, this is what a kala will learn with a kala teacher how to understand it. Women are older these days than they were in those days. Their bodies function perhaps a little differently, but technically speaking, the Rambam says that the halacha is that after they get married, if she was a virgin, her blood that flows is considered pure. So the Rambam is saying you don't need to check because there's going to be blood there. What's the point of checking? But it's still tahor, it's still allowed to be together. Yudzayin 17 and Mishamish does it probably rabbis. If a husband and wife had relations many times in one night, they don't need to check their their cloth after each relation. That each time they finish, they will wipe with this garment, this aid. And the next morning, when they get up in sunlight, they'll check to see if there's any blood. If there's any blood found, it doesn't matter at that point. Then you will say from which one it was. You'll see they're tamei from that point. So technically, you could think you have to check each one. The Rambam says you don't have to check each one because this is an extra level above and beyond in a certain sense. So therefore, you could use one all night long and check in the morning. What if they had relations and they did use this cloth like the Rambam says, and then they lost it? Then for sure the Rambam says, do not have further relations until you check beforehand. Perhaps there was blood on the aid that got lost. As if you're kind of more focused on saying, I need to check before to make sure. Yudches 18. If she puts this aid at night to go to sleep, she checks it and she uses it at night and says, I'll check in the morning, like we saw in circumstances, and she put it under the pillow, and then it wakes up and finds blood. If the blood is the stain of the blood is like in mashich, drawn out, an extended stain, it looks like from a wipe. And if it was a round dot, then you're pure. Why? Because this is a bed louse or a bed bug that you kill under the pillow, and that's what caused the red blood. Because a red drop, a round circle, wouldn't make sense to be from a stain from wiping. You test if she checked herself as the proper aid. And touched it to her urecha, so to her thigh. And in the morning she looks at it and she sees it's red, she's tamei. We don't say that maybe there's a bed bug, a bed louse on her thigh that she killed it and that's what the stain is from. We say no, it's too close for comfort to start putting that into case here. But if she checked with a cloth that had not been checked before to make sure it was white and clean, So we don't know what was on the cloth to begin with. Maybe there was a stain, a blood stain on it before she even used it. And now in the morning she looks and she clearly finds blood, but we don't know. Maybe this was from an old time before the cloth was used the night before, or maybe it was from the night before. If the dam was the size of a gris is nowadays is somewhere like around the size of a dime, then she's a nida. She's tummy, she's impure. If it was less than that, less than the size of like a dime, whether just a couple speck, with just a speck, then we say you're tahar, and it's probably from a bed louse, not from her. Chaf. If a husband and wife are having relations and suddenly she said, I see blood, or she checks and she sees blood because of the relations, she is allowed to do it again with him. After the second time they're together, she sees blood again. Then they do have relations a third time. If she saw blood um, after the third time they were together, the husband and wife, then they're no longer allowed to have relations ever together. The Rambam says, when does this idea apply? There's nothing to kind of say it was contingent on. There's nothing to say that maybe the blood came from somewhere else. If it was close to the time when we expect the period to come, we say, okay, you know what? It's not because of relations that caused the blood, but it's because of a period. We expect it now. If she had a wound or a cut, we say, okay, you know what? Maybe this blood comes from the wound or from the cut. Mishana midam shatir b'shas attachment. The Rambam says clearly, if the blood looks different, in other words, the blood that she was used to having from her period versus the blood from the wound, you can't say one's relying on the other. Let's keep going here a little bit more. But what part of the situation is that if every time a husband and wife are going to be together, be intimate, and have relations, it's going to cause her to bleed, which is going to cause them to have this question of she becoming tame in middle and how to deal with it, like we read before, and always becoming tame. That's not a healthy life to be living. So after 3 times, when we have the concept of a chazaka, of it being established, first time and second time, it was circumstantial. What happened? But after the third time, if we have nothing else to say that it was based on or why it happened other than relations, then we have to say you two having relations will always cause blood, and that's a problem. The Rambam continues, a lady is allowed to say that I have a wound inside, and that's where the blood is coming from. And we don't have to go check her. We believe her. She'll still be mutter. She'll still be allowed to her husband. Even though there seems to be blood flowing during the time of their relations, but she says it's from a wound. We believe her. Chaval 21 Mishra also done Mishastashi Parmesan is Vein should have a litless boy in this circumstance where they had relations 3 times and some blood. And there's absolutely nothing else to say it's contingent or no other factor that causes it. Her is discouraged to have to get divorced. With Tesla Nasal she's allowed to marry a second husband. Nisas Lashani, if she marries a second husband, and then she went ahead and had relations 3 times with her second husband, and once again saw blood each time, or is it the Garish? Now she has to divorce her second husband. With Tezli Nasli Shlishi, she go ahead and marry a third husband. Nisas Shlishi, Verasa Damkach B'Shas Tashmish, Pamishenu Ishnei Shlishi, how do to Garish? And then if it happened a third time with a third husband, 3 times of relations, and she saw blood, she has to divorce him. But certainly he not said she's forbidden to marry until she heals from whatever is causing this blood to happen. So the first husband, we say maybe it was partially his fault. Second husband, again, 3 times it happens with her becomes what we call a chazaka. It's an established fact. It's based on her, perhaps, and she has to do something about it. Health base 22. How does she check to know if she's healed from this or not? ומכנס השפר את המקים שהיא החלה, ומאחזס את השפר אז מכל ומייך מונח על רשעי. So she basically takes a pipe and uses a cotton swab, a Q-tip type of item, and puts it in to check. And she goes as far as she can without hurting herself back into by the mouth, the beginning of the uterus. If she sees blood on the head of this cotton swab, she knows that it's from that deep in. It must be from the source, as it's called, from the uterus. Klum. And if you don't see any blood on this Q-tip or the swab, you do a Shadam Shiraya with Studding, that it's coming from the sides, not from the depths of the source of the uterus, that she saw her. Because the blood from the sides is what causes it to become impure. Blood from what we call the mucker, the source, and from the uterus, that's what causes her to become tummy. And then she go ahead and marry others, as we explained earlier in Hilchos Ishus, how to get married. So this is the beginning of the conversation on the Nida, which is obviously one of the more practical halachos in Isturei Bia, because it does affect every relationship. We're going to continue in tomorrow's chapter, which hopefully you'll be learning with joining in to learn, but how a lady becomes a Nida, and Wednesday the difference between Nida and Ziva, which we already touched on slightly, and eventually the laws of birth on Thursday, and seeing the calendar with which day you expect, that we kind of touched on quickly, will be on Friday. And finally, what about a stain, which we also touched on? If you see a stain, when is it a bed louse? When is it a flow? When is it from inside? When is it from the uterus, etc.? Will be on Shabbos coming up. So stay tuned for more of these halachas. Have a happy Chol HaMoed, and hope all is well.